What up, Pittsburgh Steelers fans? Matty P here with another episode of Steelers Touchdown Under. We are previewing the rookies from the Pittsburgh Steelers as they go into their game against the rookies of the Green Bay Packers. And so we're going to talk about how both teams' rookies are traveling so far. It's a bit of a mid-season update for both teams. The Steelers are 5-3. The Packers are 3-5. Obviously, that's a reversal of the records. Also, a really interesting test for players on both sides of the field. So let's just crack into it. Let's start off with the Steelers. Now, I will preface this show with two things. Both the Steelers and more so the Green Bay Packers are using rookies a lot this year. So this could be a very, very long show if I go into absolutely everyone. I'm going to give you the key guys. We'll give a quick summary of some of the other guys, but let's kick it off with the Steelers. So really, Herbig and Spencer Anderson have played minimal this season. Herbig's obviously made splash plays, but predominantly his role at the moment is special teams. Kind of the same with Rodney Williams as well. Maybe we see a little bit of him against Green Bay because Pat Freiermuth is not meant to come back until week 11 against the Cleveland Browns. So you might see a little bit. But that's a good segue to Darnell Washington. Darnell Washington had his second reception on the season this week. One reception off one target for 7 yards most. Now he's got 2 receptions for 8 yards on the season. Again, they're not really working him in from the receiving game, but he does continue to provide value in the blocking game. Next guy I wanted to talk about before we get into Broderick Jones is Darius Rush. Darius Rush had 3 tackles in this game after coming to the Steelers in the previous week. He allowed only 1 for 2 completions, a quarterback rating of 68.7, and allowed only 12 yards on that 1 completion. So pretty good from him. I think 7 of them were air yards. I think it was 5 after the catch as well. So pretty good performance for Darius Rush to come in. Lastly, Calvin Austin, he had 2 rushes in the last game for 10 yards, no receptions. He's now 14 receptions off 25 targets for the season. That's 56%, 162 yards, 11.6 yards average per reception, 1 TD, and 7.24 yards per rush. Sorry, he's 24 yards on 7 rushes as well. So just a little bit over 3 yards. All right, let's get into Broderick Jones. Had his second full start against the Tennessee Titans. The run game looked a lot better. We saw that with the Steelers went from having 70 yards against the Jags to having over 160 against the Titans. You saw Broderick Jones pull like a guard did off the right side into going into the left. We saw what a big difference that made on a few big gains. He looks good. He should continue to start. Obviously, it'll be about whether it's the left or the right. I think for the moment, until we see an issue with Dan Moore, whether it's on-field play or injury, it'll be on the right. But I do think next season, definitely the starting left tackle. And I hope that's kind of where they steer this season as well. But just let him get him acclimated to the NFL. And Mike Tomlin did say this week that it's sometimes easier for the rookie to be able to go and play that different position because they're being moved around anyway. Why would you go move someone that's doing pretty good generally most of the time in Dan Moore Jr. over to the right side just to slot Broderick Jones in there, particularly if it's not necessarily guaranteed going to be like that way for the rest of the season. I kind of want him to make this move when the time's right, though. I don't think him just playing right tackle for the sake of it this season makes sense. But I'm not Mike Tomlin. I'm not Pat Meyer on the Steelers offensive line as their Steelers offensive line coach. So let's see what happens. Okay, next player I want to talk about is JPJ. JPJ had a day. Now, this is a photo of his interception, his only interception of the season so far against Baltimore, but he had a day against DeAndre Hopkins. There's been a lot to talk about in the media, but I want to give you a couple of stat lines. He allowed 4 receptions of 11 targets to DeAndre Hopkins for 60 yards. That's a 15-yard average per reception, allowing just a 36.4% catch completion from DeAndre Hopkins. That's incredible. He basically, his other stats on the stat sheet were 3 tackles on the day, 1 pass defense. On the season so far, he has 4 pass defenses, 1 interception, 17 tackles, and he's played 46 of the defensive snaps, turning himself into seriously one of the Steelers' best corners in a while. He's a top 2 corner right now on the team. All we can ask is that he continues to develop in this way. But Porter had a day, and I think that'll continue. And I can't wait to see what he looks like in the next Ravens game that the Steelers play by the time the last week of the season rolls around. All right, now we can get to our final Steeler that we're going to look at here, and that is Keanu Benton. Now, Benton had has played 41% of the Steelers' defensive snaps so far. Had a couple of tackles, I think it was in this game. Wasn't what stood out in the tackles, though. The tackles weren't what stood out to me in this game. Obviously, he's already had his first career sack, etc., which he got against the Raiders. What stood out to me in this game about Benton was how much pressure he put. Now, and this is something that even Mike Tomlin talks about, doesn't always make itself appear on the stat sheet. He talked about that in regards to Trayvon Walker at the Jaguars a couple of weeks ago. Talked about it, I think, a little bit this week with a couple of players from the Packers as well. He does talk about in press conferences about guys that collapse that pocket, make it difficult for the close down the run game. Benton, a couple of times, if you go back and watch the tape, had two guys trying to hold him back. He was pushing through the middle, putting Levis under a heap of pressure, and it just looked great. Now there were a lot of offensive tackle injuries and offensive line injuries for the Titans in Thursday Night Football last week, but Benton was a constant menace anytime he's on the field, and he's continued to prove that. And I just think he's having more from the mid-season review perspective rather than just the Titans game, where I did love some of the things he did on tape that don't show on the stat sheet. He is having a really solid rookie season. The Steelers, this is a steal of a pick. Now, that doesn't always necessarily translate to the stat sheet. But remember, Cam Hayward did very minimal in his first couple of years, particularly his first rookie year. Benton's getting a lot more experience than that. So I'm really excited what years 2, 3, and 4 on this rookie deal for Benton look like. As I say, absolute steal. All right. Well, with that, we will move. I've tried to keep this pretty short, sharp, and sweet for you, motoring through it. It is very difficult when both teams have used so many rookies. But let's meet the rookies that are playing for the Green Bay Packers. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of names that we're not going to cover because otherwise we would be here for over an hour. But that is Cox, Sam Clifford, the backup quarterback, Malik Heath, who's had a couple of tackles on the season, a couple of receptions on the season, Caleb Jones, who's a defensive tackle that's played minimally, Ben Sims, who's had literally 2 receptions for 14 yards. He is a tight end. And Wilson, who is their 3rd or 4th running back on the roster that's rushed 11 times for 73 yards. We're not going to go deep into all those guys because we've got plenty of other guys to cover off that are contributing that you need to look out for. But needless to say, they've got well over 11 or 12 rookies that are contributing. So really young team from the Packers. The record, they've had guys out with injury, including Jones, and I think Dylan spent some time on the sideline. I think Watson, because I had him in fantasy, I got rid of him, spent some time on the sideline. They've been a little bit all over the place. They're probably going to put up more of a challenge than a 3-5 team usually would versus a 5-3 team. But they've got some rookies, and it's really interesting some of the trends we'll see. So let's start off with Colby Woolen. Now, he was a guy that I thought when he was there on day 3, the Steelers could go after him. Bit of a DeMarvin Leal type, probably not as fast and agile as Leal, but more of that sort of more agile defensive lineman rather than an interior defensive lineman. He's played 30% of the defensive snaps, 11 tackles on the season, 1 tackle for a loss. I thought he'd do a bit more for the Green Bay Packers, to be honest. But that's how it sits. He was drafted. I think he was their 6th-round draft pick. They've then got a guy called Carl Brooks, 290-pound defensive lineman, 2 sacks on the season so far, 2 quarterback hits, 3 tackles for a loss. He's played 37% of the defensive snaps. So he is someone that Steeler fans should be looking out for, that the offensive line will need to be prepared for. He wears number 94 jersey. Interesting to see how he'll take the field in this game and look to shut down the Steelers' run game. But also, obviously, with 2 sacks and 2 quarterback hits, he can put pressure on Kenny Pickett and help the Packers collapse the pocket. The next guy we're going to talk about is Anders Carlson. Now, Anders Carlson is a kicker that they brought in. He has made 100% of his extra points this season so far. He has made 84.6% of his field goals. Now, rather than just that percentage, he's made 100% of all field goals in every category, including 50+, except for 40 to 49. So that's quite funny because over 30, his 30 to 40 number, he's had 6 out of 6. He's 20 to 29, he's 2 out of 2. His over 50 yards, I think that he's had 2 out of 2 there. So he's 13 of 11 on the season. But he can't seem to get them between 40 and 49 yards. We don't want that to be the case this game against the Steelers, but the Steelers have to be careful because this guy is pretty clinical. 11 from 13 is pretty clinical, just field goals alone. So he's one to watch out for, their kicker. He's a really, really good rookie that they've brought in there. And we saw the difference that McPherson made a couple of years ago when he went to the Bengals. Same thing, Cade York last year with the Cleveland Browns as well in our division. The next guy I want to talk about was a guy that you saw a little bit mocked to the Steelers in the draft. His name is Anthony Johnson, the safety out of Iowa State. He's had 1 interception on the season so far and 2 pass defenses. So he's about 6 foot. I think he's 190-pound safety, more of a free safety type. But when teams play left and right safety. So look out for him. He could be a surprise packet for this team on the Green Bay Packers. We'll then look at their 2 tight ends. They drafted 2 tight ends that were sort of in the top 7 or 8 tight ends in the draft. They were Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Now, Musgrave has had a much bigger start. I think he was drafted in the 2nd round, early 3rd round. But he's had a much better start to the season in his rookie career than Kraft, but that also matches. I think Kraft was taken the 5th or the 6th round. But Kraft's only had 2 receptions for 5 yards on the season versus Musgrave, who's had 27 receptions from 35 targets. He wears number 88 jersey. He's had 249 yards on the season, 1 TD, and 10 first downs. So they do use him to keep the chains moving. He has scored that TD, and that's quite a lot of yardage from basically Jordan Love, who's starting his full season as starting quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. So that's a key target for him. So look out for how the Packers offense looks to weave in Luke Musgrave into their offense and to extend drives and to make big plays on 3rd and long, which we know the Steelers generally struggle with defending. Next player on the list is Jalen Reed. He's had 23 catches of 40 targets for 57.5% catch completion percentage, 333 yards versus and has scored 3 TDs. To put in perspective, that's basically double Calvin Austin in yards and more than double his TDs. So this guy is contributing. Mike Tomlin mentioned he was one of the better slot wide receivers in the draft this year as well. Mike Tomlin mentioned in the press conference. He's a guy that I might mock to the Steelers late day 2, early day 3 maybe. If they were going to go out and get a wide receiver, they didn't go that way. That made sense. I was happy they didn't go that way. But he was a guy that if they were, I was like, this guy could be anywhere late day 2, early day 3. So interesting he goes to the Packers. Their other guy, Wicks, the wide receiver, he's had 14 receptions off 23 targets for 189 yards, 1 TD. Again, more than Calvin Austin. So what you get from Musgrave, Reed, Wicks, they're really using these rookie receivers and tight ends. So these 3 rookies in the receiving game keeps it fresh, hard for teams to defend against due to they're not being a heck ton of film. Gives Jordan Love a lot to move around with. Obviously, they've got 2 good running backs in Jones and Dillon. So again, this versatility, it's a bit of a early stage pick your poison offense. So Steel fans, our defense is going to have to be on song to stop some of this stuff because they've got the guys that can do it. And then we'll cover off the final player from them, their 1st round draft pick in Luke Van Ness. Now, Luke Van Ness, 35% of the snaps so far in the season on defense, 20% of special team snaps. He wears number 90 like TJ Watt. He has had 1 pass defense, 1 sack, 3 tackles for a loss, 4 pressures, and 2 quarterback hits. So definitely getting to that quarterback, definitely providing some pass rush, definitely being disruptive on defense, but he's not necessarily taken it by storm. You probably, Benton's having that better season now. They play a 4-3. I'm pretty sure they still play 4-3 defense. They play a very different style of defense to the Steelers. But at the same time, this is a guy that you got to look out for because he does have that pedigree. People at one point had him as a top 10 pick. So he's the one that the Steelers offensive line's got to be waking up for, particularly when you consider there's guys like Carl Brooks and Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary and Preston Smith. This will be a very good defensive front from the Packers facing the Steelers. So really should to see how guys like Broderick Jones step up on the offensive line and also how we get the run game going because that's going to be super key to getting this defense on the back foot. But yeah, with that, we're going to wrap up this week's Steelers rookie preview ahead of the Packers-Steelers game. Looking forward to that game. Looking forward to the Steelers hopefully being 6-3. How good would that be? Especially with then that gives them 3 out of 9 games. They've only got to win 4 out of 5 to basically close out the season. 4 out of 5 from 7 games. You'd love to see that as well. But yeah, can they take advantage of their 3rd home game in a row, finish 2-3 at the at-home schedule, finish 3-4, 75% coming out of the bye? We'll find out. But